Hello and welcome to the on-premise cannabis-infused food and beverage consumption virtual event. Today we are talking about a new business opportunity for Ontario. This event is brought to you by TIO, the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, in partnership with New Heights Cannabis, and our presenting partner is Canopy Growth today. I'd like to welcome you all to our event today, and I can see that attendees are joining as we've just started the broadcast. I'm told that there's over 300 attendees today, so that's fantastic. Just really demonstrates to me and hopefully to everybody who is participating today what an important topic this is right now and the opportunity. Obviously, there's some interest and excitement around this. And the group of speakers that we've brought together today are really going to share their vision and talk about some of the issues and questions that are going to come up around how to make this happen, if indeed it is something that Ontario does choose to support. My name is Jennifer Mason. I am the founder of New Heights Cannabis. I am also the president and founder of JLM Strategic Marketing. JLM Strategic Marketing is a boutique integrated marketing agency, and we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. My career has been over 20 years in working in the marketing industry, largely on agency side, and I've had the honor and pleasure of working with the Ontario tourism industry through almost from the beginning of my career. I'm working right now with the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, and have partnered also with Destination Ontario, Destination Toronto, and many of the tourism partners that operate within, including DMOs and all the businesses. Some of you may remember me from some of my favorite events that I worked on with the Tourism Industry Association, one of them being Nick Belenda walking over Niagara Falls on a tightrope, and worked with Destination Ontario to help welcome him here. I also worked with Destination Ontario to bring to life their display in Ottawa for Canada's 150th. And so it was through my work with the tourism industry that I became interested in the cannabis industry. We were at a AGM meeting the summer prior to legalization, and many of the partners were in attendance, and the question came up, how does the recreational space in cannabis impact an opportunity for tourism in this province? And it was really early days and nobody really knew what to do or how to go forward. And so we decided to support the industry by educating ourselves. And when we went to educate ourselves as an agency on the cannabis space, we realized that there really wasn't, because things were so new, there really wasn't a platform and an education area to bring people together to talk about cannabis from a marketing standpoint, brands, media, the industry at large in terms of how it's going to develop with businesses, and then following that, what is the opportunity for tourism? So we created New Heights Cannabis as an education platform, as a trade show platform, and really just in general, an opportunity to bring people together to discuss this emerging industry. It's very complicated, cannabis, as many of you know. It's highly regulated, but what does cannatourism really mean? Well, what cannatourism means to each person is slightly different, and it can really span across many aspects of tourism, everything from festival and events to an activity such as painting or, wine and weed tours, shopping, trade shows, and now we're also getting into the culinary side of the industry. There's also a lot of hotels, resorts, and properties that have also been involved already. Some of them have hosted our events. We had an event at the CN Tower. Our first New Heights event was there. Last year, we were at Blue Mountain in partnership with TIO. We did the pre-conference day to the summit. And this summer, we ended up doing our event virtually for obvious reasons. So that's just a little bit about us and the cannabis tourism industry. But what are we really talking about today? What does the on-premise channel really mean? Well, we're talking about cannabis-infused products that you would serve at restaurants and licensed establishments like lounges, bars, or cafes. But we're not talking about today specifically, we're not talking about infused foods from a chef perspective. We're talking about consumer packaged goods. And this might actually surprise some people that we can talk about cannabis as a CPG product, but that's actually where things are going. And what you're seeing today here is just a snapshot of some of the fabulous products that Canopy Growth has put to market under their brand Tweed and Houseplant. And they've also got this wonderful chocolate that I've yet to try, but sounds really great. And they have a whole lineup of different products. This is just a snapshot. And I know Sean, who is here from Canopy Growth today, will dive more deeply into some of their products. But I wanted to give everyone a sense of what we mean by the on-premise channel. We literally mean a bartender or a server is going to provide a packaged product to somebody at a table when they're out to eat. So with that in mind, here's our agenda today. Following me, you're going to hear from Beth Potter, President and CEO of TIO, and she's going to speak to you about what she's hearing from the industry partners and why she thinks there's an opportunity for cannabis in the tourism space. As I mentioned, Sean is here from Canopy, and he will outline the opportunity for everyone and why Canopy is supporting this and hoping to get this passed within the province. And then we have two research partners, Brian Applegarth, who's the president from Enlightened Strategies and the founder of the California Cannabis Tourism Association. And what is really exciting about what Brian's doing is he's doing a lot of research. He's got a great perspective on the actual consumer and who they are as a tourist, and then what the opportunities for Canada tourism. Following Brian, David Coletto from Abacus Data will talk to you about a research study that he's engaged in with Canopy to determine the public openness to this opportunity. And then we have two great industry panels. Beth will host the panel on restaurants, festivals, and events. And then I will follow with hotels, motels, and resorts. And we have some really great industry partners that are going to talk to you about their thoughts, their perspective, and just some of the challenges or things that need to be thought of if this were to go forward. And then at the end, we're going to have a question and answer period and a wrap out. So I really encourage you to share your questions in either the chat or in the question tool here. We'd love to hear from you. And at the end, all of the speakers will come on and you can address a question to them directly. So why now? And I would say that, we're probably all sick and tired of hearing about COVID, but it is such a reality in our world in 2020, and it has caused everyone to pause and change the way they do things. And some of the challenges that we're facing right now, especially when we go into further lockdown, as we are as of Monday today in the city that I live in, which is Toronto, it just puts the tourism industry many months and or years behind even further in terms of recovery. So, we know that from your surveys that you're doing with TIO, just from, the news and what we're hearing and all the travel lockdowns, it is a very difficult time for many, many businesses, and new opportunities to grow, to recover is what everyone's looking for. So hopefully you'll see today why this might be a great opportunity for some businesses to take advantage of this new development and grow as things recover. So some of the things that I've been wondering about and what you might have in mind when you're listening to the panels today is what's been happening since legalization. We're actually 2 years in, believe it or not. And the industry has, in some ways moved at a slow pace, but in other ways has gone leaps and bounds since October 2018. Also, what is the opportunity for the tourism industry? So I've touched on a little bit and we'll go deeper into that today. This is only one element of it, but there's many facets to tourism. And then the question is, how do we move forward? If we support this notion, how do we move forward? How do we move forward in the right way, the responsible way? And who should I partner with? Who are the key players? What do I need to know? And how do I find the right fit for my business? And then a little bit about cannabis consumers and what experiences they are looking for. Who is that cannabis consumer? And how do they intersect with their travel experiences? And I believe you're going to hear a lot of those answers today. One thing I wanted to share with you that is going to make things really change by this time next year is the emergence of the retail channel. This is just a quick snapshot of some imagery from some of the big name retailers that are out there right now launching stores like crazy. And I wanted to share this map with you. This is a map of Ontario that the AGCO has published on their site, so you can go and find this. It's a dynamic map, so it changes every day. I just took a snapshot of this map this morning. But as you can see, the green dots here represent retail outlets that are currently opened. The gray dot represents applications that are currently in process. And so when you go through the list, you can actually, on another page on this website, you can see the list of all of the companies and their address of where they're proposing to open a cannabis location. And I believe there's over 2,000 applications in there right now in this province. So, stores are opening anywhere at a pace of 20 to 50 a month. So you can imagine at this time next year, I think we're currently at around 200. And Sean, if you have that number, feel free to correct me later. I believe we're approximately 200 stores open today, and we'll be at about 1,000 by this time next year. So the industry is growing. There's no doubt that, cannabis retail is going to be in most people's community, and any of the retail landscape that's not covered through bricks and mortar can be covered by the OCS and are already covered by the OCS right now. So the longer that this industry is in market and this development happens, the more comfortable and socially acceptable cannabis will become. And this means that the legal market is actually outpacing the legacy market, which is a great news story. The US, you can see that there's still a ways to go. But every month, more states are sort of, tabling this issue. Recently, Mexico just had their referendum and it was approved. So they're on their way to a market similar to Canada, but of course with their own nuances. And then ubiquity, you're going to see cannabis across many different products. We're talking about packaged goods today in the food and beverage area, but we're starting to see more creams. We're starting to see other products that are going to show up in shelves in many different areas, maybe not eventually just in cannabis stores. Many of you might know that Shoppers Drug Mart is already in the medical market, and they sell a lot of consumer packaged goods. So is there a point where there's going to be a transition? Maybe, who knows, but a lot can happen, and I really think that now is the time for any business that's really interested to look hard at this cannabis opportunity for tourism, and especially in the food and beverage industry. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the cannabis consumer is very different from the stigma that we all had in mind in the early days of 2018. They are not the same age of the stoner imagery that we might have had in the past. They are the everyday person, and they each have their own needs and may turn to cannabis for different reasons. And so we're going to hear a little bit more about that. As I mentioned, Brian and David have a lot of data to share with you today. And so my vision through this effort, through other efforts, through New Heights, is really a thriving Canada tourism industry and ecosystem where we have partners working together and that we're operating this industry in a very safe way for everybody. I'm a mom of 2 teenage boys, and believe me, we talk about this topic a lot. And even though I'm a fan of it, I'm certainly not a fan of minors getting their hands on it. And I think if we all take responsibility and treat cannabis in the same way we do beverage alcohol, which is very successfully run in this province and country, I think that we'll be a success as a cannabis industry as a whole. So I'm going to sign off here, and we're going to start to hear from the other speakers. I'd like to introduce Beth to you in a moment, but I just wanted to let you know that we look forward to you sharing your support. And after this event, in a couple of days, we will email a link to you where you can show your support and send a letter into your MPP letting them know that you support this. And we've created a tool to make it very easy for you to submit if you are in fact a supporter of this. But either way, we'd love to hear from you either through our hashtag New Heights Cannabis, or you can reach out to Tayo or myself or any of our speakers. So thanks for that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Oh, wait a second. Did I do this well? Okay, yay. Hi Beth, welcome. I just wanted to quickly introduce Beth. Of course, many of you know Beth and have seen her in all of her big efforts. I have to say, Beth, I really think that you have done an amazing job putting Ontario and tourism on the map as an issue and an economic driver that really needs to be addressed by our government. And we were so pleased to see your efforts acknowledged when the budget came out a couple of weeks ago, and there's recognition how important tourism is to this country, to the economy, and to many of the businesses. And you know, a lot of tourism businesses are in the small to medium size area, so you really champion that internationally to help connect our province to the world, but then also representing the members. And you know, you've managed to bring in many more members during this time. So with that said, we'd love to hear from you and your point of view. Welcome back.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate the intro and the acknowledgement of the work that myself and my team have been doing, not only on a pre-COVID time, but most importantly in the last 8 months. I want to welcome all of you here today, and I want to share my thanks also with Jen and her team at New Heights Cannabis for co-presenting this event with us, and to Sean and his team at Candy Bee Growth for coming to us with this idea in the first place. I think that just by looking at the registration numbers, and again, we have over 300 people registered, it really does show that there is interest in this space. And I know that in the past, whenever we've featured cannabis tourism topics at our events, whether it was the Tourism Issues Forum or the Ontario Tourism Summit, it certainly has generated a lot of buzz. And bad word to use, I guess, but it's certainly generated a lot of interest, not only from the people in attendance to try and understand how they fit into this market, but also from the media. Everybody wants to know, every reporter wants to know, what does cannabis tourism look like here in Ontario? So it's been a work in progress, and certainly we've started to see prior to COVID and all of the various restrictions that have been put in place since, that cannabis tourism was starting to become a thing. And there is a lot of interest in it. But we're still trying to understand what the opportunities are. Where is the potential for growth? Is it in the tours? Is it in tasting events? Is it in fine dining with cannabis-infused foods? So these are the opportunities that are being explored, but of course they need the appropriate regulations in order to make them happen. And that's kind of why today came about. So if you don't know who the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario is, if you're new to this forum, let me just back up and tell you a little bit about who we are. So we're a not-for-profit trade association, and we represent all of the tourism business, regardless of the sector, here in the province. When COVID-19 first started, we were able to lift our membership fees so that we could be accessible to all tourism businesses. And so if you join us in 2020, you'll get a year's free membership. It's allowed us to really engage with tourism businesses on the front line to understand the challenges that they're facing and the way that they are changing and adapting their businesses to meet the new circumstances in which they're doing business, whether currently it's at a reduced capacity or going forward looking at a very hyper-local and local domestic market before we start welcoming back international visitors. Now, most times when a business needs to make a change to the way they're doing business, a regulation isn't required. But when it comes to cannabis, that is not the case. So TIO, our main mandate is to be the industry's voice with government, to take ideas and recommendations to government on ways in which the policy environment can be changed, modified, or enacted to make it easier and simpler and better to do business here in the province. So there was a consultation back in February about, is it time to start introducing on-premise cannabis-infused food and beverage areas within certain venues. Then the pandemic hit, and we're now at a place where we'd like to go back and begin these conversations with government, or pick up the conversations with government to get the regulations put in place, especially in time for next patio season. So one of the things that we're going to do today is we're going to, first of all, hear the case study for why this would be a good move to make. And that's going to come from Sean. And then we're going to get some background material and some data on whether or not this is something that locals and tourists would be interested in. And then we're going to hear from some industry experts in the event side and the restaurant side and the hotel and motel and accommodation side. And we also want to hear from you. And as all of this is happening, we are capturing all of this information and all of the questions that you might have so that we can prepare an amazing submission to take to government and to reignite the process of getting this regulation put in place. So Jen mentioned that we need your support, and we will. The TIO team is we're small but mighty. And I should probably give some shout outs to my team. Chris Bloor is our Director of Policy and Government Affairs. Carol Greenwood is our VP of Membership and Business Development. We've got Max Morel West, who's our Stakeholder Relations Manager, and Jess Halliday, who is our Communications and Media Relations Coordinator, and Landon Logie, who is our Events Manager. And that's it. That's the whole team. So the more support we get from business, the more voices that get added to the work that we're doing, we find that helps us move the needle faster and get to success sooner. So you're going to receive a follow-up link from us tomorrow. You're going to get an email. There's a link there. And what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to write to your MPP. Now, we've already written the letter for you. You can go in and you can amend it if you wish. You can add your own thinking. You can personalize it, but it's a really simple process at the base. All you need to do is put your information into the program, and it will generate a letter. And when you say okay, it will send a letter directly to your MPP. You'll also get a copy of the letter in your inbox. And why are we doing this? Because we're looking for new opportunities for the industry. We're at a time of rebuilding and renewal, and it's never been more important for us to put the focus on an industry that is able to drive economic growth for our province and create jobs. So I hope that we've got your support. I hope that if we don't have your support now, that we'll have your support by the end of the afternoon. And as Jen said, we're looking forward to taking your questions. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and I'm happy to turn it back to Jen.
Thank you. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so thank you very much for sharing that. And one thing I wanted to say as I introduce Sean is that one of the developments during COVID is that cannabis has been considered an essential service. Through the lockdown, along with the LCBO, cannabis retailers are open, and we had delivery service approved in early days in the spring, and it was removed, and yesterday it was reinstated. So these are great developments. It just shows there's a lot of consumer support for this industry. Now I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Sean Webster. Hi, Sean. He is the VP Government and Stakeholder Relations in Canada for Canopy Growth Corporation. Sean joined Canopy Growth Corporation in April 2018 and was appointed Vice President, Government and Stakeholder Relations Canada in September 2020. Prior to joining Canopy, Sean held a number of senior positions in the Canadian pharmaceutical sector, including VP Public Affairs for Shoppers Drug Mart, where he was responsible for directing the company's national public affairs and community investment activities. He also worked in that sector for UCB Canada, Solvay Pharma Canada, and Eli Lilly Canada. Sean has held positions with Enbridge, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London, UK, and as a ministerial assistant at the House of Commons in Ottawa. Sean is a member of the board of directors for the Ottawa Convention Centre and former vice chair of Exhibition Place. He also served on the board of Providence Healthcare and has volunteered for a number of community and health associations. Sean graduated with a Master's of Business Administration from the Cass School of Business at City University in London, UK. He is also a graduate of Ryerson University, where he's awarded a Bachelor of Applied Arts degree. Welcome, Sean.
Super. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Jenna. I really appreciate your time. And first of all, before I get going, Landon is going to team up my presentation on the screen here. I live in the rural part of Ottawa, and some days my internet access and bandwidth is not as good as it should be. So I appreciate Landon flipping the slides for me. So I'd like to thank Beth and her entire team at TIO and Jennifer and her team at New Heights for organizing this conference today. I think this is a very timely topic given what's happening right now with the hospitality and tourism sector in Ontario as a result of the pandemic. And hopefully today we'll outline to you some of the opportunities that may exist for businesses in the sector getting engaged in the cannabis space, and in particular in being able to serve cannabis food and beverages in their establishments. So if you can flip to the next slide, Lyndon, I'd be grateful. Super, thank you. So as Beth mentioned, in February, the Government of Ontario, through the Ministry of the Attorney General, launched a consultation to solicit feedback on the sale of cannabis products for consumption lounges and special occasions permits for events like festivals and concerts. The consultation concluded in March, and we all know what happened in March when COVID hit and we went into lockdown. So since that time, understandably, completely understandably, the government has had far more pressing objectives and concerns than this. But they are still considering how they wish to act. And if you're interested in getting engaged in this part of this, in this sector, as Beth mentioned earlier, now's the time for you to speak out. And I'll kind of outline some of that for you right now. Landon, next slide. So as mentioned, there's an opportunity for Ontario to be the first jurisdiction in Canada to establish some sort of a regulatory framework that would allow the sale of cannabis food and beverages for consumptions on site. So this could be lounges, bars, cafes, restaurants, as well as special occasions, festivals and concerts. I think something that we should just clear up right at the beginning, though, is that we're not looking at this in terms of cannabis by smoking or consuming cannabis by smoking or vaping because of the preclusions of the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. And the Ministry of the Attorney General made that very clear in their consultation documents. What we're looking at really is what's happening now in the emerging cannabis food and beverage market. So Deloitte has estimated that the cannabis edible market alone is estimated to be worth at least $1.6 billion a year, and cannabis-infused beverages worth an additional $529 million. So that's an estimate. That study was done in June 2019, far before we put these products into the market. So right now, we manufacture a range of cannabis beverages. There's another entrant in Ontario into the market as well, which is called Truss Beverages, which is a partnership between Hexo and Molson Coors, who are located in Belleville, who've also introduced beverages to the market. And there's another company called Fluent, which manufactures under the Every brand, who've also introduced cannabis beverages into the Ontario market. So our belief is that there is a significant market that can provide Ontario's hospitality entrepreneurs with opportunities to include cannabis food and beverages in their offerings, and for new businesses to be created. Landon, next slide. So what's in it for Ontario? As mentioned, new business opportunities for Ontario's entrepreneurs, helping to enhance the economic recovery, frankly, once we come out of COVID and people once again are allowed to congregate, and also not certainly least, but I just wanted to finish up with attracting cannabis tourism. So next slide, please. So in terms of new business opportunities for Ontario's entrepreneurs. As I've outlined already, given the potential scope of the market for cannabis beverages and cannabis food products, there are significant opportunities for entrepreneurs to develop new businesses. So if somebody wanted to be in the cannabis space, they weren't interested in running a retail store. If they had a cafe and they wanted to serve cannabis food or cannabis beverages, this is a great opportunity for them to get engaged in this sector. We think that aside from traditional cafes and lounges, opportunities also may exist for entrepreneurial investment, such as yoga studios, spas, maybe even a barbershop or salon, and galleries. If you wanted to enjoy a cannabis beverage or cannabis food at an art gallery, I think that that's wholly appropriate, and that's something that people might be interested in pursuing. So if Ontario were to develop this regime, it would be the first jurisdiction in Canada to do so. We think that's important from an Ontario business perspective because the first mover advantage would enable Ontario entrepreneurs to develop brands that they could then expand across the rest of the country once the other provinces came into line. Just interestingly, the province of Manitoba launched a consultation last month on cannabis on-premise consumption as well. So Manitoba is also looking at this. We're in active discussions with other provinces who are also looking at this right now. But we'd like to see Ontario go first. We're an Ontario company. The beverages that we manufacture right here in beautiful Smith Falls, Ontario. We think it'd be great for Ontario to grab a hold of the advantage that they have in the cannabis space in the province to help develop the sector and show their support. Next slide, please. Now, again, in terms of enhancing economic recovery, we think that this is something that the government should consider as well. As we all know, the hospitality sector, writ large, restaurants, bars, tourism, hotels have all been heavily hit by COVID. I'm not traveling at all, and I was a very, very frequent flyer with lots of trips across the country, and especially back and forth here between Ottawa and Toronto. So everybody's hurting. So we think that establishing some sort of a regulatory framework to allow for cannabis consumption will create jobs, not just for the culinary and service staff or for cannabis production, licensed production staff to ramp up the supply to service this new channel, but also for the construction, engineering, and design trades who may be called on to help develop specialized spaces to serve these products or to enhance current spaces, spruce things up, do some renovation. Also, food, beverage, and restaurant service suppliers who have been hard hit through COVID could be called on to supply additional products and services to new entrepreneurs that are going to be setting up. So just in conclusion on that, we think that it will help spur the creation of new business and help the hard hit restaurant, hospitality, and tourism sector to help Ontario get back to work. And final slide, please, Landon. And then in terms of cannabis tourism, and I won't go too much into this because Brian Applegarth, who's going to be following me, has done some fascinating research on what is a cannabis tourist, and what we might be looking at here in Ontario using the very live examples in what's happened in California. So he's got some statistics and some lessons there that he will go into. But just in terms of what's happened in Colorado, and this is 2016 numbers, but which is quite early on in their legalization process. But they cannabis tourism accounted for about 6.5 million visits in 2016. And they estimate about $1 billion US in tax revenue were raised through cannabis sales. And if you look at Ontario's wine industry, they've had great success in attracting people both to the Niagara area, where we also have a facility, and also Prince Edward County. And so it's created a lot. The wine industry has done a phenomenal job in attracting tourists and attracting and creating wealth and creating jobs, frankly, in those areas. So we think that there's similar opportunities here for the cannabis sector. So hopefully I've set kind of the table for Brian and also for David, who has done some research and is going to be following after Brian on what the attitudes of Ontarians are towards this opportunity, for them to provide a bit more detail. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Sean. Really appreciate that. As Sean said, next up is Brian Applegarth. He is the president of Enlightened Strategies and the founder of the California Cannabis Tourism Association. And I find it really exciting that there is a Cannabis Tourism Association in California, and there's so many great parallels and partnerships where we can learn from each other and partner together. Because it's such a new industry, we're all, as Beth said, still figuring this out. And even those who have been immersed in it, and for me, it's it's only 2.5, almost 3 years now, but it's still not very much depth in terms of if you think of other industries. So Brian has led the advancement of cannabis tourism. He founded the California Cannabis Tourism Association and is an expert advisor to MMGY Global and MMG Travel Intelligence, the world's leading integrated travel and hospitality marketing agency. Bryant is the president and co-founder of Enlightened Strategies, a company that develops and implements data-driven plans for destinations seeking to capitalize on cannabis-related opportunities. In his most recent work, Enlightened Strategies partnered with MMGY Travel Intelligence to conduct groundbreaking national research identifying and understanding the cannabis-motivated traveler profile in the United States. Brian is an at-large board member of the California Travel Association, chairs the CalTravel Cannabis Tourism Committee, and serves as a subject matter expert for organizations in both tourism and cannabis industries. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate it. And I want to say thank you to Landon as well for kind of taking the controls here for my slide deck. And it's really an honor to be part of such a great lineup of speakers to address this really important topic of cannabis-infused edibles and drinkables and the opportunity, because this is the Cannabis 2.0. This is the next phase of kind of the evolution of the industry. So it's really an honor to be here. So what I'm going to share with you today is the national study that MMGY Travel Intelligence and my company Enlightened Strategies conducted. We built a survey out over the last year, and then we went to market early March, just prior to COVID really setting in. And it was a national landscape, and we're going to use those data slides as well as dive into a few other topics to really share what's happening, not just in the United States, but also in California, where cannabis is going into its 4th year of legalization. So this presentation is titled The Cannabis Motivated Traveler Profile. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this first slide, I wanted to just share some information and do a little bit of education and level setting, because it's very common, obviously, that there's some confusion around this with hemp, CBD, cannabis. It can be very confusing very quickly. So we really have 3 areas that we're going to look at here. The first one on the left-hand column is really the endocannabinoid system and wellness. And what that part of the slide is really dedicated to is explaining how cannabis is a tool for wellness at the core of it. In the early 90s, it was discovered that we have an endocannabinoid system, that humans and animals have an endocannabinoid system, just like a skeletal system or a reproductive system or an immune system. And really the core function of this system is to try to consistently bring your body into something called homeostasis, which is basically balance. So when you ingest cannabis, it has these properties called cannabinoids, and they float throughout your body and attach to receptors from the brain down. And what they do is they work to promote balance in your body. So if there's any kind of ailment, whether it be inflammation, obviously epilepsy we're very aware of, and there's a whole slew of different kind of therapeutic effects that cannabis offer and ailments that they're able to address through working directly with the endocannabinoid system. A really interesting part to this is cannabis plant totally aside, we actually internally produce 2 cannabinoids that is a closed loop system and works with our endocannabinoid system. So the biology is fascinating behind it because cannabis is truly rooted in promoting wellness and well-being, which obviously goes hand in hand with the emerging trends and the attractive trends in the travel and tourism industry. Also in that column is that green shake that you see, and this is really speaks to one of the three kind of interesting strategies when it comes to food and beverage, and that's nutrition. You know, cannabis just off the plant as a power green is very nutritious, very anti-inflammatory. One of the cannabis lounges evolving up in Humboldt County, which is in Northern California, is really building their consumption model around these really health shakes that are non-psychoactive. They're very nutritional and therapeutic. So the middle part here, we're going to move on to the dosing scale. And really what I wanted to address here is how cannabis and what the effects are of THC and how I believe it will continue to evolve in tourism. The more that people get educated and the more that there's models that serve in this way. And just like when you drink alcohol, you have a certain kind of effect or a buzz set in. And I try to describe the optimum experience with alcohol is waking up the next morning and reflecting on how you had a wonderful time the night before. You have no hangovers, you laughed a lot, you had a lot of joy, a lot of great interaction. And that alcohol really supplemented that experience. Of course, many people are aware of the overindulgence of alcohol as well. Now, the cannabis counterpart to that is that it's a different effect. It's very much rooted in wellness, working with your endocannabinoid system. And what you try to achieve is something called flow state. So when you look at the middle of this graph, flow state can be equated to a runner's high or being in the zone when you're playing basketball and you're making all your shots. This concept of flow state is the optimum dosing and the optimum balance for when you ingest cannabis and you're hitting that target. And what happens during flow state is you feel immense joy. You feel very present in the moment. Anxiety and stress kind of drift away. And it's something where you feel completely immersed in the activity or experience that you're partaking in. So it's somewhat enhanced. And it's really interesting because with cannabis, the different types of varietals and cultivars, we're learning that depending on the composition, that they actually kind of steer the effects. So there's certain ones that promote intimacy. There's certain ones that promote communication. And of course, we're all aware of the ones that give you an appetite or stimulate your appetite. And this is one way that it feeds into the foodie experience as well, is you have cultivars that are known for stimulating appetite and making taste and texture more enhanced and vibrant. And this is another way that cannabis is going to manifest in the food and beverage sector as an aperitivo to a Michelin star meal. Another way it's going to surface is infused cuisine, where you have a multi-coursed cuisine, and it's a journey, and it's got a different narrative through it. And again, this is a visitor experience in a well-curated way. And some of these happen with a little bit higher THC dose with the first course, and then having more CBD as the course goes on to counteract the effects. So anyways, it's a complex landscape, but those are just a few examples of how I believe it's going to continue to bubble up and surface in tourism and travel. And the third column is just a few things I wanted to share, some really big successes that California had this year. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, actually signed into law the Cannabis Appalachians of California, which is rooted in terroir, microclimate, essence of place, very similar to wine. So that is now officially in play with the CDFA, the Department of Food and Agriculture of California. And starting January 1st, they're going to be very soon accepting application from licensed cultivators to submit for designation of appellation. There's also two geographics. There's a city of origin and county of origin. And then the last is events. You have obviously conferences, as well as with the Emerald Cup, you have business conferences with Weed and Wine Symposium, that happened here in Sonoma County where I live, where wine is a big part of our culture. So is cannabis. There's a lot of legacy in this region. So there's a dedicated business conference to how do we cross-pollinate and work together to build and uplift the cannabis and wine industry, as well as the tourism industry. And then of course the Emerald Cup, which happens in Sonoma County in December during the off season, and it brings about $20 million of economic impact over 3 days, attracting about 30,000 attendees. So that just shows the economic impact of cannabis events and what they could attract. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the study that Enlightened Strategies conducted with MMGY Travel Intelligence. And we're going to dive into the cannabis motivated travel profile here with a hyper focus on food and beverage. Our study was titled Cannabis Tourism Opportunities, Issues, and Strategies. Next slide, please. So a couple slides right out of the gate just on the survey methodology. This survey went out to over 1,500 people in the US. Some of the qualifying criteria was 21 years old and 21 years old or older, an annual household income of at least 50K, active overnight leisure traveler profiles, and then of course those that identified interest in partaking in a cannabis related activity. And the importance of the $1,500 marker is that statistically it's significant because it's only a 2.5% variance with a 95% level of confidence. Next slide, please. So in the screening process for this methodology, these were the different cannabis related activities that were part of that screening process. And the cannabis motivated traveler profile expressed interest in at least one of these. Some of the ones I want to point out is a spa treatment with the CBD product, which we considered a cannabis related activity. Also, we included a cannabis pairing experience or trying different types of cultivars. And of course, we talked about beverages and food throughout it. So there's a few different ones. We also explored, do you want to visit a farm? So we really kind of painted a picture of the different opportunities that cannabis-related tourism offered. And this was part of the survey methodology screening. Next slide, please. And this is what we discovered, that of the leisure travel audience in the United States, 29% of the active leisure travelers qualified for this audience of the cannabis motivated traveler. And that's 18% of all Americans, which is very significant. There is a ready audience that makes their decisions based on the ability to access these cannabis related experiences and activities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this first slide, we go right into consumption, which was very enlightening. As you can see, of all the different methods of consumption or methods of ingestion that we surveyed, smoking and vaping were the bottom two. You had edible cannabis and edible CBD at the top, and then you obviously had interest in beverage as well, which is highlighted, and also topical application was of interest. So for this national cannabis motivated travel audience, the smoking and vaping was actually the least of interest for this cannabis motivated traveler. Next slide, please. So on this next slide, we really get into the self-described personality traits and the key differences. And the side-by-side columns that you see is the portrait of the standard American leisure traveler versus the cannabis prospects or the cannabis motivated travel audience. And you'll see that we discovered there's some interesting differences between the two. What we learned is that the cannabis motivated travel audience in a very strong way self-identifies as a foodie. And that gets even more intense depending on how, and we'll look at it on the next slide, but that foodie discovery is very relevant to this cannabis motivated travel audience and enticing them. As you can see, we also saw that the beach bum and the outdoor adventurer also scored higher. So these are people that like nature, natural experiences, authenticity, being outdoors, being around the beach, which obviously speaks to Ontario and what your region offers. Also, the cannabis motivated travel audience scored higher and self-identifies to a higher level than the standard leisure traveler as a wine enthusiast, as well as a craft beer lover. So these are people that like wine, beer, cannabis, outdoors, as well as music festivals. So these were some of the discoveries and the big differentiators that we saw when compared next to the standard active leisure traveler of the United States. Next slide, please. So this goes a bit deeper, and really the most interesting slide here, or the most interesting point that I want to point out here is that you'll see in that one column, it says avid consumer. So as part of the research and the way that we cut the data, we actually separated out two different audience segments. We had the cannabis curious traveler and the avid cannabis user traveler. And we started kind of making sense of how those differentiated. And you'll see that when you look at the avid consumer of cannabis, the foodie score actually went even higher. I mean, you're getting upward toward 15% or more. So that foodie score is very present when it comes to that subsegment of the avid cannabis user. And then of course we have the cannabis curious segmentation as well. Again, you see the beach bum, the music aficionado, craft beer lover, wine enthusiast. So this just really kind of paints a picture of what are the other interests and how do these people self-identify, what are the personality traits and what are the key differences from the standard active leisure traveler. And it really makes the case that the cannabis motivated travel audience is an active traveler in market. If there is a curated and well-coordinated marketing, then they will come to a destination and spread their spend throughout the destination. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide, we got a little more into what are the specific interests of activities and experiences that this cannabis motivated travel audience wants to access. Scoring the highest was the cannabis dispensary. My theory is that's what's most known, and that's the one of the few things that is accessible to the consumer today. So that I think wins by default in some ways. And then you'll see right below the next two, you see the infused edibles and infused beverages, both CBD and THC. So yet again, we're seeing that in the top 3 scores of what activities and experiences this travel audience wants to access. It's really the consumption of edibles and drinkables. Also right below that, you see the spa treatment, CBD topicals as a spa treatment. And then number 5 is interesting because it's just knowing that you're able to consume in a safe environment is a marketing tool right now. So if and when Ontario adopts this and implements it, and this becomes part of the landscape there in the offering of the destination, having some strategy around just communicating that and very, very open about that this is a safe place to come and experience this in itself is going to entice this travel audience. And then on the 6th one, let's touch on that real quickly. This is touring a cannabis farmer grow house. And this dovetails back into the terroir and the appellations that are now part of the California landscape. And this is somewhere, obviously, it'd be amazing to see more regions adopt kind of this terroir specific microclimate essence of place narrative to really use that as a marketing platform to draw visitation and to make the experience for visitors even more compelling, as well as uplift specific brands that want to share that value that. Next slide, please. Okay, so in recap, there's really 5 key takeaways from the presentation today. The active cannabis motivated traveler takes more trips, they stay longer, so heads in beds, and they spend more in destination. They're very active. They self-identify as a foodie and a wine enthusiast. They love the outdoors and music festivals. They prefer edibles and drinkables and topical methods of consumption. Visiting a dispensary and experiencing a cannabis farm are also at the top of the list. And confidence that they're consuming in a safe way is important to them. And this, I'll just reiterate that this cannabis motivated travel audience exists and are waiting to be spoken to in a coordinated way and visit a destination. So it really drives kind of their travel decisions. Next slide, please. So this slide comes from a data partner of mine, Headset. Thank you to Headset for providing this slide. And what I really want to show here is the growth. Okay, someone mentioned that cannabis is essential, and this is a very important development over the last 8 months. Cannabis is an essential designation for a reason. At its essence, it promotes wellness. Some people use the word medical, absolutely, when it comes to epilepsy, but it also, per the endocannabinoid system, working to balance your system constantly. When you take cannabis, it works even more effectively. So what's happened in this pandemic is we've seen cannabis setting record sales. In July, California had record-setting sales with cannabis. And this graph shows the upward trajectory. If you look from 2020 March on, just on the right-hand side of the graph, you'll see the upward trajectory of cannabis use. And this is important, right? Because the travel and tourism industry is struggling and trying to recover. And cannabis and hemp and CBD, all of it, are new products that really have a clean slate that are able to be developed in a really smart, safe way. So as tourism rebounds and tourism recovery further ensues as COVID lifts, to have those products ready to market and organized to speak to all the new users that are adopting this during the pandemic. You know, usage is up. There's new people using it to cope with stress and anxiety and all the different curveballs that the world is dealing with right now. And what I see as a cannabis tourism expert with that is that there's new users coming on board daily. People are using it at a higher level for quality of life and balance. And this is just a growing travel audience that is going to be primed to tap into as COVID lifts. And this graph really shows that significant growth that we've experienced as an industry since March. Next slide, please. So these are a couple kind of nuggets I pulled out of the strategic playbook for Ontario, just familiarizing myself with the brand. And what I really see here is that obviously it's a place of culture, diversity, amazing cuisine to tie it back into that food and beverage opportunity. Those 3 different models that I shared, from cannabis as a nutritional element with cannabis leaves as a power green and shakes as an ingredient. And then you have the pairing, the cannabis cultivars and varietals that are known for stimulating appetite and enhancing the palate and the flavor and the texture of food. And then you also have the multi-coursed infused cuisine, which is everything from charcuterie with olive oil and honey, cheese with honey, to more robust experiences with chefs that really use cannabis in a way to cook it, where you also feel the effects. And these are all really exciting, different categories. So I think as cannabis and cuisine and beverages gets more normalized and more permittable, and there's more enabling legislation and policy around it, and an opportunity to innovate, there is a first mover advantage, to Sean's point. And I think it would be a really smart strategy to empower, in a really calculated, controlled way, the innovators in your market to help guide this, and the collaboration between the restaurants and the growers. And and then you tie in, of course, to that sense of place, yet again, the terroir, the Appalachians, and really create these platforms for cannabis to exist in a normalized and elevated way. Next slide, please. Yep, so I want to thank you all for listening to my presentation. I think on a last note, I'd just like to reaffirm that this cannabis motivated travel audience is very active. They travel throughout the market. They want to do different activities. And really at its essence, cannabis is a tool. With the THC side and the microdosing, it's a tool for enhancement of experiences. And that also includes the performing arts. It also includes, like I mentioned before, intimacy. It helps amplify nature. It does a lot of things in very special ways. And I'm very excited to see how cannabis emerges further in the tourism sector. So yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. And I want to thank Canopy as well for inviting me to be part of this.
Thanks so much, Brian. Amazing presentation. And thanks so much for the research and data. I think it's super important for us in the industry in Ontario to see what the consumer looks like. And I bet you there's some surprises in there for many people. That not the stigma at all anymore. And every day this landscape is changing. So and we definitely draw on American travelers, and we want Americans to come back to Ontario and to Canada. And obviously there is a huge sector here who's interested, and many of them know that Canada, like, we've made headlines around the world, so we don't have to go out and tell people that cannabis is legal in Canada. What we have to do is tell people what they can do with it that's safe and exciting. So yeah, I think you demonstrated that very clearly. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, next up we have David Coletto. He is CEO of Abacus Data, Inc. David Coletto is a founding partner of Abacus Data and full-service market research and strategy firm based in Ottawa. Hi there, David. He has over a decade of experience in the industry, and David and his partners founded Abacus about 10 years ago, and since then it has grown to one of Canada's most respected market research firms. David has worked with a range of other organizations, including the Shaw Communications, the Canadian Bankers Association, Canopy Growth Corporation, the Bank of Canada, CBC, the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Pharmacists Association, Music Canada, and the Dairy Farmers of Canada. He's also one of Canada's leading experts on generational change and millennials, regularly invited to speak to groups across Canada. He earned a PhD in political science from the University of Calgary in 2010 and has a BPA-PM, which I don't even know what that stands for, you're gonna have to tell us, and MA from Carleton University. Very smart, that's what I know. He's also an adjunct professor at Carleton University. Welcome, David, so nice to have you here.
Thanks, Jennifer, and it's a long-winded answer to say I studied politics in Ottawa, and it's public affairs and policy management. Good afternoon, everybody. A pleasure to be here. First and foremost, I am of legal age to consume cannabis. I didn't need to be carded before I got into this event. Everyone always asks how old I am. I'm actually turning 39 in a few weeks, so well past legal age, and it's great to be here. I'm just going to ask that Langdon allow me to share my screen. So if we can get that going, I've got a lot of data for you. But as Sean mentioned, and Brian, that was a great presentation, lots of really great insights into the consumer. I want to shift gears a little bit and get us to think about this question of on-premise cannabis, edibles, beverages from a public affairs lens. Because even if, as Brian demonstrates, and I think it is true, there is a demand for consumers both in province and outside of province to experience these products in restaurants, in lounges, in bars, and other kinds of venues, government regulators, government decision makers have to allow it to happen. So that was the question that Sean and his team at Cannabis asked our team at Abacus to explore, and we did it by asking ourselves, you know, what do people know about these products? What's their feeling about, you know, overall their sale of edibles and beverages, which are now available in retail locations across the province, and how do they feel about the idea of expanding access to them into on-premise locations? And so I'll take you through the results fairly quickly, but just so you can see the methodology, this was part of a national survey we did in September for Canopy. We interviewed over 2,400 adults, 19 plus. I'm going to focus on the Ontario results that included 500 interviews representative of Ontario's population by age, gender, educational attainment, and region of the province. So we have a large enough sample, plus or minus 4%, to have a real good sense of how people in the province are feeling. And so I've got 4 key insights that will help, I think, guide the conversation in the rest of this event, and to give you an insight into how Ontarians would feel about this, because I think you know, policymakers at Queen's Park, in the provincial capital, in other provincial capitals across the country, ultimately need to feel comfortable making this decision. And you know, I reflect on these results given that we've, you know, about a month ago, we just passed the 2-year anniversary of legalization in Canada. We did some work with the Cannabis Council of Canada that showed us, in terms of legalization overall, more Canadians today say they feel comfortable, support legalization than they did 2 years ago. There's a growing, and Jennifer, you spoke to this, sort of the removal of stigma around this product, and expanding market. I think of my parents who are in their 60s, live in the suburbs of Toronto, you know, talking about the experience, talking about, you know, using different products, mentioning that Martha Stewart has a whole line of edibles is an example of the opportunity that exists. And I would never have thought of my parents as somebody that would fit into Brian's consumer segments about those interested in traveling and experiencing cannabis outside their home. The first insight is to understand the context of this. Less than half of Ontarians are familiar with cannabis edibles or beverages. And what I mean by that is only 44%. And I say only because this is a growing sector, and every single day, people in the province and outside the province are introduced to products that they didn't even know existed or didn't even know were available to them. And so we always have to keep in mind that this is really the starting point, that over time, as we've already learned with cannabis more generally, as people become more comfortable, as they learn more about these products, we find they tend to become more accepting, more open to seeing them in different locations, and particularly on premise. So that's an important fact. And it's also noteworthy that already, even in a short period of time across the province, 16% of our survey respondents said they've already tried cannabis, edibles, and beverages. So this is a growing market very fast, despite many of the restrictions and marketing restrictions that exist. There's a growing consumer base for this, but there's still room to grow, and there's still room to introduce people. So it's important to keep that in mind. And what we find throughout this survey is those more familiar with these products, those more likely or more regularly consume cannabis generally, are more comfortable with this over time. And again, that's an indicator of where we might go as this as this issue goes on. The second insight is at a higher level than that. 8 out of 10 Ontarians either support or are open to the basic idea that edibles and beverages should be available for sale. Now, this is not on premise, this is just generally, how comfortable are Ontarians? And so what we find, as I said, is almost 8 out of 10 support or are okay with this idea. And important from a public affairs lens is that almost equal numbers strongly support the sale of these kinds of products than those who strongly oppose it. And I often look at the ratio of those who strongly support versus those who strongly oppose to understand the weight and the potential for any political risk or opposition. And what we see is there's just as many people who are eager to see these products in market, in retail, and I'll show you in a minute on premise, than those who wouldn't like to see that. And I think that push and pull is important. But for everybody else, and this is what we see with cannabis generally in Canada, is we find a lot of acquiescence. People who say, I'm not in love with these products, I don't hate these products, but I'm okay with seeing them available for consumption and for purchase. And as I mentioned, when we looked in our survey at the relationship between those who, the frequency of consuming cannabis products writ large and their position when it comes to the sale of edible and beverage cannabis products, you can see a very strong relationship between how frequently you use these products and how open or supportive you are. But I think it's important to note that even among those who never admit they've never used any cannabis product in their life, a majority of them say they either support or are okay with having these products available for sale, right? And that to me is the indicator that this is an area where there's going to be generally strong public support, or at least, as I said, acceptance of it. They may never come and buy a beverage, but they don't think that it should be prohibited for anybody else from doing that. Now, the third point is when we get into a little bit specific and we offer up a proposal, and this was the idea that Canopy wanted to test, is we found that still a large majority of Ontarians, 2 in 3, support or can accept on-premise cannabis edibles and beverages in restaurants and lounges. And this was the question text we actually shared. We asked, we're now going to show you an idea that some people are considering. Please read the text below carefully and tell us whether you can support, accept, or oppose this idea. And the basic premise we proposed was restaurant, bars, and lounges are licensed by the province to sell regulated cannabis beverages and edible products to customers and guests who are of legal age. Everyone who enters the restaurant or bar must be of legal age to consume cannabis. And then we also just made it clear, given we did this survey in the midst of the pandemic, that the new rules would take effect after the COVID-19 pandemic was over. And as I said, we still continue to find very little resistance, relatively speaking, and fairly broad support. In fact, when you compare those who support versus those who can accept versus those who are opposed to this idea, we find almost a 3-way split between these groups. And again, equal numbers on the ends, those who support versus those who oppose. So opposition is slightly higher than the general sale of these kinds of products. But given how potentially, divisive this issue would have been even 5 years ago, as there was some initial conversations about legalization of cannabis more generally, I think the opposition is probably a high watermark, given that so few people actually understand the regulations around these products, about how many and how much people can consume, and the range of products that actually exist. So the more that those who are opposed, who are also more likely to have never used these products, come to understand them and understand that they can be regulated and prevent minors and others from accessing them, I think you're also going to see these numbers continue over time. And so that leads to the big question for those making the decisions, is there political risk? There's always some risk in any decision that changes any kind of regulation, but what you can anticipate is we don't find very much at all. In fact, we asked people in our survey, if the provincial government in your province, so in this case Ontario, were to move to allow on-premise cannabis-infused beverages or edibles in the setting we described, with the conditions that we described, would you be thrilled and strongly support it? Would you be satisfied with that decision? Or are you on the other side of it? And what we learn is that just over half of the province would either be thrilled or satisfied if the government made that decision. On the far end, we continue to see that about the same number of people who are just strictly opposed, right? These are going to be the cannabis never folks who would support going back to a prohibition, would support pulling back all the, I think, progress that we've made. But then you have about a third in the middle who indicate to us that while they may be unsatisfied or they weren't going to cheer this kind of decision, they also really don't care, right? It's not going to have any impact on how they feel about the government or their MPP or whatever. And to me, of all the over a decade of research I've done looking at public affairs issues and how to anticipate whether the public is going to, a backlash might exist, I see no evidence in this data that this decision would hurt or be very risky for the provincial government right now. In fact, when we test the number of messages in this survey, Ontarians understand the scale of the challenges that tourism operators, food service operators, live music venues are facing because of the pandemic. They also recognize how important that is to the quality of life in their own neighborhoods. And so anything that not only gives these businesses an opportunity to diversify, to offer new products, and to attract new visitors to the province, I think would find very broad support, because when we ask people in other surveys about how well has legalization gone more generally, fears about access to minors, fears about impaired driving, all of those have dissipated to the point where people now say the sky hasn't fallen. And I think when it comes to on-premise cannabis beverages, that's where the vast majority of Ontarians are. So the upshot of this research is this is only the starting point of this journey. Most Ontarians don't have much knowledge or understanding about these products, but as they become more normal, as folks like Martha Stewart and others that we know attach their brand and name, and the market opportunity grows, I think so too will acceptance. It's already broadly accepted, and we find actual significant support for moving in this direction, and therefore, I conclude by saying not a whole lot of political risk. So I will end there. I'll hang around if there's any questions at the end, but Jennifer, I'll hand things back to you.
Hi, David. Actually, you're handing it back to me, but that's okay. Good to see you again.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah, hi. I want to thank you for that. I think that what you've done is really laid the groundwork for us and showed us that now is a good time to be having this conversation, not only from an industry perspective, but a consumer and government perspective as well. So I just want to thank you for that, and I'm so glad you're going to be hanging around in case there's any questions for you at the end.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our first panel, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel, and I'm going to invite our guest panelists to join me now. With me today, we're going to be speaking with Dave McNeil. He's with Festival and Events Ontario, and of course, working in the festival and event space, is very familiar with licensing, special occasion permits, working with volunteers, and with municipal government. So he's going to have a really good perspective to share with us. We also have Richard Anderson. Richard is with SmartServe Ontario. SmartServe provides all of your alcohol and beverage service training in the province. And so he has a really good, solid understanding, not only of the regulatory environment, but what is needed from a training and preparing staff perspective. And finally, but not least, Tony Elenis. Tony is with the Ontario Restaurant, Hotel and Motel Association, and Tony's organization is a membership-based advocacy organization similar to TIO, but with a real focus on the policy issues that affect restaurants and accommodators in the province, especially around food and beverage and alcohol. And they were also very important to the review and the implications of the Smoke-Free Ontario regulations. So definitely brings a wide perspective. He's also, as we like to call him, a recovering hotel general manager. So he has that insider view as well. So gentlemen, welcome and thank you so much for being with us today. Interesting topic. We've just heard some really interesting research on traveler and consumer sentiment. And I wanted to start off by asking you, what do you see as the opportunity from your perspective? And, Dave, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Bev. Beth, certainly, what the customer wants is important to us, and that customer experience is always sort of number one on everybody's mind as they're planning an event. Back in good old 2019, when we were still gathering in large groups, the Ministry of the Attorney General did give festivals and events the ability to allow marijuana on site. You couldn't buy it, but you could bring 1 to 5 pre-rolls on site if the festival organization went with that and were comfortable with that. So we've had some of our festivals toy with that a little bit. I spent a lot of consultation time with Richard just because, in that format, there was no way to monetize that. People were just bringing that on. And as long as you were following the rules of Smoke-Free Ontario, that was okay. What it did bring into question is the risk management of it, and certainly talking with all of our insurance providers, the liability, and in that, if somebody went out and enjoyed or partook in a joint and then went back into a beer tent, that has an SOP, and anybody that's ever had their name on an SOP, it's kind of a nerve-wracking thing. And that could be the point that you go over that line. And as Richard and the Smart Serve team were telling us, impaired is impaired, and how you got there or whatever happened, the responsibility is on you. So, our recommendation was to be very cautious with it because there wasn't a revenue stream. And you were assuming all risk and all responsibility. Since that time, I've been part of the roundtables with the ministry as well, talking about stage 2 and what that might look like. And I think the big hold up still is how that liquor license and how liquor and marijuana or cannabis combine, and how can you do both, or do you have to isolate and you don't move from one tent to the other, and exactly how do you do that?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of questions, and one of our biggest things as we were advocating was really erase the gray, get it black and white, because a lot of events, a lot of stuff happens in that gray area, and that gray area where you can get in a lot of trouble. So as we're formulating these rules and regulations moving on, I think it was important to us to be very, very clear of what is legal and what is not, and what you can do moving forward.
Well, that certainly sums up our industry in a nutshell. I mean, clarity, precision, give us really good indication of what we need to do, but also make it adaptable so that different size and different locations can apply it locally as well, right? So that's one of the conundrums for sure. Tony, what about you specifically in the restaurant, from the restaurant perspective?
Well, Beth, this is an exciting conversation, no doubt about it. And everything starts with a conversation, and it evolves. We strongly support the province in establishing a regulatory framework to allow cannabis ingredients for consumption in restaurants, in cafes, and in bars. This will be an enormous benefit to the food service industry that has been operating with thin margins for decades. Ontario operates with the thinnest margin than any other province, about 2 points below the Canadian average, constantly. So this is a new revenue stream. And of course, to support the recovery that we need from the COVID-19 pandemic, which will take many years for many to rejuvenate from this devastation. No doubt, there'll be more hungry customers and upsides and what I think an influx of tourist dollars to restaurants, to bars. We expect tourism growth, specifically from areas where cannabis is prohibited for consumption, and there's many of them. We've seen and we've studied successes that have been demonstrated by jurisdictions such as in Colorado. It will support most hospitality businesses and the overall tourism sector right across Ontario. Of course, it also creates significant tax revenues for the province, and it will support the reduction of this substantial deficit that the province is building up due to COVID. Much of the revenue, of course, will originate from out of the province. But much more than that, and Brian earlier in his presentation alluded to it, it's about the consumer and the preferences. It's about meeting and even exceeding customer satisfaction. The adventures of culinary experiences in preparing food with cannabis flavors. We have very creative chefs here in this province. To me, is no different than preparing meals with other ingredients, such as perhaps truffle oil on a beef tenderloin or a saffron in paella, rosemary rack of lamb, and I'm getting hungry just talking about it. But that's the restaurants are existing.
So I mean, one of the things that it'll be interesting to overlay over top of Brian's research and David's as well is, what we know already about the foodie and the wine enthusiast traveler, where we know that they're more likely to spend higher amounts.
Yeah, and Sean alluded to this one where he talked about the wine country. Well, Brian talked about terroirs, appellations, place of origin. This is a brand new culinary component of our tastes, and we're talking about flavors. We haven't gotten there yet. Wait until you get those chefs in the kitchen and start preparing the type of food that we've never seen before, and blend it in their own recipes, and bring us to a total new dimension of culinary.
Great. Now, Richard, from your perspective, what kinds of things do you think we're going to need to see in a regulation in order to satisfy the Attorney General?
Thanks, Beth. I'm in always the glorious position of somehow sounding like the enforcer here. So I will say to you that our job is to educate safe and responsible sales and service in Ontario, as per the Alcohol and Gaming Commission. So I don't set the rules. SmartServe doesn't set the rules. So I think our angle has always been, we want to make sure that we can educate people in a simple way. And there's no question there's been more regulatory changes in alcohol in the last 2 years than we've seen probably in the last 10 years. And certainly it was meant to shift and support the industry to allow them to serve their clients. So, as soon as those adjustments come in, we update our program, et cetera. Now, when it comes to cannabis, we did include modules on cannabis in our program. And there's no question that there's very little research, and certainly we don't have the history like we have on alcohol. So when you add in cannabis, whether it's infused, topicals, edibles, it does impact a person differently. And it also, we have to be concerned about what happens when you mix it with alcohol. So we're always going to be a proponent of saying that, all these restaurants that have liquor licenses and events accept liability and accept duty of care for their patrons. And those are going to continue to be really important things. And Dave talked about liability insurance, et cetera. So at the end of the day, as we learn and know how to complement, then I think it could still be a positive thing for the industry. But let's face it, it does add more potential stress and responsibility to licensees, owners, and servers. So more work, but certainly there could be some great benefit to it.
Right. So I'm gonna go back to Dave because you work in an environment, or the festivals and events in the province, they're not permanent in most cases. So how what do you think needs to be in the regulation in order to meet the needs of your members?
Well, it's a good question, Beth, and I think it's something that will evolve over time. But even dealing with the SOPs and liquor laws, and those have changed so much over time that, you know, we're recommending more and more people partner with a licensee to work that SOP because they have the knowledge base. They work with it day in, day out. You know, it used to be that service clubs would run beer tents and different things like that, and they're big money makers for a lot of events. But the risk and the liability that is associated with them, you know, follows. So you got to make sure that, you know, it's not just anybody that's monitoring and administering that SOP. You want to make sure it's somebody that knows what they're doing. And that's one of the things we talked to the Attorney General about, is that, you know, I can't see any festival go out, promoter, or, well, maybe, but I can't see going and buying a couple pounds of cannabis or to bring to your site to sell on site or whatever. So, you know, we were talking about the ability for the stores or the license holders currently to have what would be equivalently to a catering license, that, you know, we could have partner with a store in town that they could come on site and serve, knowing again that they know the regulations, the rules, and everything to follow. So that's one of our recommendations. The other part, and it's more federal, but we are pushing it provincially, is the promotion and marketing dollars that go along with it. I mean, that's very federally regulated right now, and we're hoping that you know, they'll relook at that, because as some of us older gentlemen and ladies remember, back in the days when tobacco advertising and promotion of events was taken away, those were significant dollars for a lot of major events. And, you know, I think cannabis has the ability to slide in there in some of that respect. So, you know, hopefully the feds and the province can come to some terms of, you know, how can you at least monetize something there to help with the bringing it on site and making it available for your patrons.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. And I'm gonna go to Tony now and just say, you know, there are going to be challenges with any new opportunity and new legislation. From your perspective, what kinds of challenges would your members be looking at, and how might they, you know, what potential solutions might there be?
First of all, it's a paradigm bust, but we need to get there. It's important to recognize that cannabis is a legal product in Canada, and we need to ensure that controls are established and they're followed. They need to be in place, absolutely. But risk stemming from edible consumption of cannabis is not different than the risk stemming out of restaurants serving beverage alcohol, or purchasing products as a consumer from the beer store, from the LCBO, or purchasing cannabis products direct from the cannabis retail stores. One risk in cannabis consumption could be public impairment, but there may be public health arguments for making reduction in overall use, but existing laws regarding impairment provide sufficient enforcement and authority and deterrence. And let's talk about the industry. Food service operators have for many years rehearsed how to obey the regulations. It is an extremely regulated industry. It touches many regulations with liquor, with health, labor, even environment, from all three levels of government. COVID-19 has proven how adaptable the vast majority of restaurants have been in operating all of a sudden with myriad of safety protocols in such a short time. There'll be control, including rules for employees especially, similar to the Smart Serve program, and that's a process. It can happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, you know, we've always known that our industry is creative and resilient, but this, the past 8 months have certainly proven that in spades. Richard, from your perspective, you know, is there a requirement for additional training that would be needed for staff in an on-premise establishment?
I think no question that right now, so education's key, regardless of whether it's SmartServe, whether it's, there's a product called CanSell, but that's for bud tenders that sell within store. So the minute you now cross over the product into a licensed facility, what does that look like? Does that mean an expanded SmartServe? Does that mean something else? So not sure, and obviously we would take direction from the Alcohol and Gaming Commission. I think the key though is that if you even look at the changes that happened in the last year with alcohol that were implemented temporarily to help bars and restaurants survive, was confusing. And people didn't know what to do or weren't following it precisely. My point is to make sure that it's clear and concise so that these servers and bar owners understand. The example I wanted to give is I read a story in the Toronto Star last week. And we always believe what we read, correct? So that's my little side dig. So the federal government right now says that you can buy a liquid infused beverage with THC, and they say that 2 milligrams is equivalent to a beer. That's in a 355 milliliter can. However, you can buy a 155 millimeter can with up to 10 milligrams. So the analogy they gave is if I pour you a pint of vodka and I pour you a pint of beer, they're equivalent. Well, clearly they're not. So even in the realm of what the law says right now about cannabis infused beverages, it's confusing on what people can buy and not buy. And the minute you move that into a serve restaurant or serve situation, the onus is on the server. So let's make it clear and easy, and we'll do our best if required and asked to communicate that to servers.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. All right, and I'm gonna go back to Tony and just ask, what would it take for a restaurant to create a separate space for to have the ability to serve cannabis infused food and beverage? Is it something that would be challenging for most restaurants, or is it something that they're looking for the opportunity to do?
I'll answer it with one or a couple of words: customer demand. If the customer is there, it'll be built, no doubt about it. As long as we have our act together, and we don't want to go back to those days with the dedicated smoking rooms only, and then the rules change. As long as we have a sustainable plan moving forward, it can happen for those options that are interested.
Okay, great. And Dave, what about you? Same question. Do you think that there are a lot of festival and event producers that see this as an opportunity?
Well, yeah, and you know what? Cannabis has been a part of the festival and event world, large concerts for a long time, legally or otherwise. But certainly, there are municipalities that have different views on it. And I would say for the large part, the majority of our events in our organization are family type events. So how do you, is it a 19 and over that it's a consideration for, or how do you mix and meld the two? And the other thing I'm wondering about, and I maybe throw it out as a question, but I was under the assumption that moving forward, it was the ability to sell products which already were infused, and that ability to infuse, whether it's at a culinary level or wherever, is sort of stage 3.
Well,
so right now it's just
certainly right now we're talking about pre-packaged infused, but I think the long game is to be able to go to what will be, kind of the higher end cannabis infused, chef prepared gourmet, but we have to start somewhere. So, and you're absolutely, a lot of your events are certainly family oriented, but the live music crowd is probably one where it sounds like from what I'm hearing, you'd probably have to make a choice. It's either going to be, it's a cannabis event or it's an alcohol, event that has alcohol. And right now, anyway, it'd be hard to, from what Richard's saying, it's hard to tell It's
Yeah,
just hard to know what's the difference, right?
we had a lot of discussion around the table on that, and clearly the Minister of Health is one or the other, not both. And you know, it came down to, well, do you have a cannabis tent with a blue bracelet and a beer garden with a red bracelet, and you can't go back and forth, or how does it work? But yeah, those are some of the challenges, and you know, and that's why we're asking for clear and concise rules and regulations that eliminate as much gray as possible.
Great. Well, and I'm sure that that your members will be at the table as we continue this conversation going forward. Tony, any final thoughts that you would like to share from the restaurant perspective?
Well, I realize we need to move slow at this, and we go back to the beverage alcohol. I recall back in the late 70s when I was managing a hotel bar with entertainment in it. You could not have a customer take a drink and move from one table to another. And now we build concepts just for that we move around.
Yeah.
So we are going to see 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to look at our conversation and they're going to wonder what we're talking about when it's going to be so much modernized, and looking forward to that day.
Absolutely. You know, it's been a great chat with all of you. I want to make sure, Richard, did you have any final thoughts just before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. I think it's as simple as this. There's 21,000 licensed restaurants, bars in Ontario. Now, those numbers might be down, right, Tony? Sorry. But imagine the impact if all those facilities now are in this position. In other words, it can be impactful and it can be done properly. And we have a lot of great bar owners and servers in this province. So if the rules are clear, very capable for sure.
Well, and it certainly, if we do this the way that we're talking about as one regulation, it opens the door of opportunity for everyone, regardless of where they are in the province as well. Dave, any final thoughts?
No, I think, yeah, the future, you know, hopefully this becomes an issue real soon and we're all back together gathering in large groups, and, you know, this becomes top of mind, and we're moving it forward.
Great. Well, you've given us a lot to think about. I want to thank all three of you for being with us today and for the conversation, for the frankness of the conversation. You know, as we've said, we are certainly feeding into the government the ideas that we hear, and we will be incorporating your thoughts and ideas into that as well. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And that I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who is going to host our panel with the hotel and resort industry. So thanks very much, guys. And Jen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Beth. That was such a great panel. What a great discussion. And it's really nice to hear from people who are dealing with many different operators, right? You know, the industry themselves that, you know, Tony's obviously working with all of these restaurant owners who are really struggling, some of them. And Richard, you know, I believe was involved with the province around the delivery of alcohol through some of the takeout ordering that's happened. That has been a big improvement. And to my knowledge, I don't think I've heard any negativity around that delivery service.
No, and in fact, there's really, you know, there's the move to make it permanent. So as David said, David Coletto said, you know, the sky did not fall down. So
exactly. And then, you know, when David was talking about the festivals and events, you know, I think, and Richard and I have talked about this before, that people are doing it anyways. If I can go to a store and purchase the beverage or the chocolate or whatever it is I want to consume and go to a concert, and I can't buy it at the concert, I'm going to do it in the parking lot before I get in, right? And, you know, so this is going to be happening anyways. So if it's legal and we're adults, we should make it clear. I loved Richard's point there. It's just no gray area, make it clear. So anyways, thank you so much, Beth. I'm going to invite my panel to join, and then we'll catch up in a half an hour for Q&A at the end.
You bet. See you soon.
Thanks. Okay, so I have the privilege of interviewing 4 panelists here, and what's very exciting is we have 2 establishment operators, and we also have an event partner who works with a lot of these venues, and then we have Wendy, who represents a nice slice of the industry and a hub actually for everybody. So I am going to let my panelists go around. We're going to go around the table. We'll start with Wendy. I'd love it if you guys can introduce yourselves, because you'll do a much better job than I could rather, and share your slides too. So first up is Wendy, and she is with Cannabis Hotels. So go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you, Jen. And I'll just have Landon pull up the slides. My name is Wendy, and I'm from Cannabis Hotels. We began Cannabis Hotels 2 years ago. I moved from being in the tech industry for 20 years in sales and marketing, and definitely saw the need and demand for canna-centric destinations, as well as destinations that have incorporated into their location. I'll go to the next slide. So Cannabis Hotels is an easy and intuitive website search engine that provides travelers with information on cannabis-friendly destinations. We have accommodations, events, as well as wellness experiences. If you want to switch over to the next slide. And we're out a little bit there on the screen. So consumers are looking for destinations, whether traveling for business or pleasure, where they can consume cannabis. Canada is in a very unique position because we can be the global leader currently in the market due to our federal legalization. This is a great business opportunity for small and large business owners, and it will provide the consumer with social consumption, as well as the ability to move forward into an area where they can now make the choice between alcohol or cannabis. Canada, and I'm sure my numbers aren't as dead on as some of the previous ones that came about, but Canadian cannabis consumers I have at 4.4 million, and globally at 263 million globally around the world. This is an entire market that currently is looking for establishments as well as locations. Next slide. So Cannabis Hotels has the very unique opportunity, and we're very excited about it because we are seeing the market merging with destinations that are opening up. So we have featured hotels globally from South Africa, the Caribbean, United States, and legalized states, as well as Canada, that we're able to feature the hotels. We also have lounges. Right now, currently primarily down in California, but that's growing, and now with Mexico emerging, that's coming as well. Next slide, please. Cannabis Hotels is a single source location where you can find accommodations, experiences, tours, events, as we roll out things like wine and weed tours, restaurants, bars. We provide travel guides as well as detailed information with map locations. Next slide. We also offer very exclusive properties and lounges. You'll see Lucas's event company here. We also have Cannabis Hotels TV, where we can showcase and provide complete mapping. Next slide. We're in a very unique position because right now there's a great deal of limitations on how organizations can advertise. Cannabis Hotels has the ability to, maybe you don't want to promote it directly on your primary website. We are able to offer that advertising stream for you, and we have been featured in some very internationally covered magazines and news outlets, and Sir Sam's, who's also on this panel, is part of that. Next slide. And these are our many advertising services that we offer to our clients. As this market continues to merge and grow, we want to be able to grow with it and be able to offer the services to our customers, hotels, bars, restaurants. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. So, I thought Wendy was a great resource to include here because I often hear from people, how do I advertise in this highly regulated world? And there's a lot of opportunity in certain environments, especially when you have a captive adult only audience, which, is the audience segment that Wendy is building. But I want to move on to another one of our panelists, John Massey. Welcome. He is from Sir Sam's Inn, and you are the first Canna-friendly resort in Ontario. So congratulations. And John,
Thank
tell
you.
us about you and your resort.
Thank you very much, Landon. I'm going to get started here. I may need a hand with the slides. I just want to ensure. Can everybody see that now?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Okay. Oh, there we go. And how's that now?
It works.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me be a part of this today. Now, Sir Sam's Inn and Spa has actually been around for quite a long time. In its current inception, it's been around 40 years, but the original home was the summer home of the Minister of the Militia during World War I, Sir Samuel Hughes. If I could just get you to go to the next slide, Landon. It's a small resort just located about 2.5 hours from Western Toronto, about 90 minutes from Eastern GTA. It is an adult and couples resort with a maximum occupancy of about 55 people, located on Eagle Lake and at the base of Sir Sam's Ski Hill. Now, the inn itself does operate both in the winter and in the summer. The rooms are lakeside rooms with wood-burning fireplaces. We do work largely with food and beverage. And this piece of the puzzle for us is really quite interesting because we have been pro-cannabis now for, I guess, just over a year. With it being a four-season destination, it does stay consistently busy. And through that, that's where we find this very interesting, because this would be another stream where, we could work during our off season to help fill those shoulder times of year and through the winter time. And that's the end of the slideshow portion. And that's really it for me. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John. Beautiful resort. And one of the interesting things about the summer has been that your domestic tourism skyrocketed, and you actually were quite busy this summer and into the fall. So that has been
Absolutely.
a good story for you. And partly probably because you've had this offering for a while. You've attracted some consumers that might be interested in cannabis, and to my knowledge, you've had a great experience to date with this offering.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, of course, as with everybody that's involved in this side of tourism right now, we're kind of learning as we're going. But this is something with us where, when we made the decision, because we are an adult and couples resort last year, to be pro-cannabis, and because it's really for us about being inclusive of everybody that we do have staying with us, it was something that we weren't sure how it was going to go, but through careful planning, actually came together quite well, and now it has got minimal impact. So much so that we still did have, our best year in years after preparing for COVID and going through that whole piece. But it's just something that we plan to keep on going in our long-term strategy. There's no reason to not think about it from anything that we've seen so far, that's for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, John. We'll come back to you. We want to hear a bit more about you in a minute, but I want to introduce Lucas. Hi, Lucas from High Bar. Lucas, tell us about you and your business. This is something that you can offer to partner with venues in the way that Dave was talking about. So yeah, take it away and tell us about you.
So thank you for having me, by the way, Jennifer, and the panel is amazing here. I just want to start off by saying, obviously, my background is events. I've been doing events for over 20 years. So when the opportunity came with legalization of cannabis, I wanted previously to start a cannabis bar service that would be available for any type of event. And because it's mobile, we can do weddings at any venue, hotel, anywhere an event would be. So that's kind of how High Bar was created for. Now, if I could have Landon please show the video. Start at the first page, the first image. So that is our standard bar setup at one of our in-house venues that we are located in. We do have in-house at some of the top venues located in Toronto, but we are looking to expand. So if anybody out there does want to reach out, we're open to the discussion. In this bar, you can see that we have certified staff always on site, and we provide a certain amount of staff depending on how much cannabis our clients are going to be sharing at their events. All our staff are SmartServe and CanSell certified. So, safety, education, all that is a priority for us. Let's move on to the next image, please. Just to show, we've actually already been partnering up with some of the top caterers and chefs that we believe are amazing out there, but we're always looking to expand. So we've got Encore Catering, Tobin Catering. These are like absolutely amazing caterers out there, and they don't do cannabis food. They just cater delicious food. So what we've done is we infuse into their caterers, into their food, with techniques that we've come up with throughout the legalization. And then we have cannabis chefs that we also offer. These are just some of them. We've got Melissa Anthony and Chef Jordan Wagman. These are just some of the many amazing cannabis chefs that we have on our roster. But we're always looking to support other chefs out there. And of course, we do weddings, private events, and corporate events. You can continue, just let it run at this point. The next couple of images you're going to see is some of the services that we've already been providing. So we've done infused coffee for events. We've got partnerships with that. We've done chicken and waffles, infused microdosed. We've done alfajores. For one of my favorite Argentinian clients, we do soda, mocktails, and of course, perfect shooters. Everything's done with elegance. Nothing is designed for kids. This is all adult food that you would be already getting at an event. So we infuse it on site, and we manage the client's distribution of that of the food or beverages. So we've been doing it for quite a while. So we actually already kind of understand what the feedback is from clients and guests at these events. And really, it's about ending the stigma, doing it properly, and that will allow more guests to want to try it. And what we've seen is that, and I think somebody previously mentioned, finding the right zone in regards of dosage. And something that we've done very carefully is figure out the best way to approach that. So we definitely have come up with our own techniques to infuse cannabis into, like I said, to any cuisine, and work with your caterers. And we want to make sure it's done safe, professional, classy, and elegant, of course, for all guests. Just ending that stigma around it.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Lucas. I want to come back to you. I have lots of questions for you too. But before we do, I would love to introduce our final panelist, Greg Elmhurst of Elmhurst Resort. Welcome, Greg. Please tell us about your resort and your involvement in cannabis to date.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Jennifer, and for the invitation. I provided a few images just to give you a quick peek at our property here. I lead the team at, and perhaps we can, yeah, there we go. So we have a cottage resort on the North Shore of Rice Lake, about an hour and a half northeast of Toronto. It's a family-owned and operated business. I'm the fourth generation in the business. And my great-grandfather moved here on Groundhog Day in 1902. We have 30 accommodation units with 85 bedrooms in all. And between a couple of different restaurants and a couple of event venues, we have about 300 licensed food and beverage seats. We have a very sort of local focus on the food. We grow actually at the moment with demand diminished somewhat with fewer events. We're actually supplying all of our own beef now, and all of our own ducks, and we also have a garden where we grow a lot of our own vegetables, and certain times of year the majority of our vegetables are grown on site as well. We offer as well a distinctive array of recreation activities and services, motorboat rentals, spa, sightseeing flights, and we have a very strong focus on tourism experience development. In terms of, actually, I should add, in terms of our integration with cannabis tourism, That's something that's new to us. We're not actively involved in it yet, so I would be in the kind of curious innkeeper category.
Thanks so much, Greg. Welcome to all of you, and here's some more beautiful pictures of your stunning resort. And Greg, are you experiencing a similar phenomenon that John had this summer and into the fall, with a lot of domestic new guests and a lot of high occupancy rate, given that people couldn't actually leave the province? Has that been the case for you too?
Yeah, that's right. We sort of opened in the middle of June to the traveling public again, and since about the middle of July, demand for rooms has been anywhere from 115 to 125% of pre-COVID levels.
That's awesome. That's great. And I guess the concern is, you know, when there's more restrictions or we go into winter months and more lockdowns happen, that it could impact your business. But then also I think we're all thinking about if when people can travel outside of the province again, how do we keep them here? How do we keep those new travelers spending and still seeing Ontario as a great summer, winter, fall, spring destination for tourism? And you know, so thank you for being here, Greg, because it's important that we're not representing only the positive side of things, that we represent people who aren't necessarily sure where to go, so that we can consider all of the implications. So, John, why don't you tell us how you guys treat cannabis on your property, and what you mean by cannabis friendly, and what you think the opportunity is for the packaged goods, beverages and food service for you.
For sure. So I guess really, Jen, start with a little bit of the history and what's brought us to here, and take it from there, this sort of thing.
Great. Yeah.
So, you know, it was an interesting learning because when we started with cannabis and becoming or coming up with a pro-cannabis strategy, it really came down to, for us, okay, you know, we've been here for 40 years at this point. We've always been inclusive and been an adult and couples resort. Even though we know that there have probably been times that it's happened discreetly over the years here, we know that it's going to be happening this summer with everything becoming legal. How do we manage that change, and what does it look like? So for us, it was really more of a natural progression. We weren't really trying to make waves or do anything that seemed out of sorts with the mainstream. It was more so for us about going, okay, we know that we're an adult and couples resort. We know that there's going to be adults and couples here this summer. How are we going to manage that and keep all of our guests happy and say yes to everybody? So in that, we went through each department, and we are a non-smoking hotel. And I think that's important to call out as well, because really through the non-smoking piece, when we thought it through, as this piece with beverages, edibles becomes more and more prominent, you know, as we heard earlier on in the discussion, smoking, vaping is going to be viewed as sort of the archaic way of doing things. So for us, it was a short-term pain, long-term gain sort of scenario where we said, okay, let's figure out how we manage this so that everybody can play nice in the sandbox, I guess, for lack of a better term, you know, until we get to that point where it is a developed program with both edibles and beverages as part of that conversation. So, you know, we just went through the resort, and luckily with the size resort we are and the size property we are, we could space it well. And we also had to acknowledge that the resort, being what it is, was experientially very positive for cannabis users. So, you know, we created spots that would not impact other guests, yet still allowed cannabis users to smoke a joint or, you know, ingest in any way that they wanted, and be in a comfortable atmosphere and be in a comfortable area. They're not just sitting in a smoking area as such. We also came up with, you know, have to think about things like fire policies, and if people want to go for a walk, and where they can go and where they can't go, and ensuring that proactively our staff and our teams are thinking about these things and how to properly engage guests when they do have questions. Having said all of that, we put all those plans in place, and really for the first 60 days, it was perhaps something that was high on people's radar. However, the big learning was that it really wasn't what you would consider that stereotypical cannabis consumer. it was more about people that had been using it perhaps medicinally and were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, but had been staying at home. And now we're venturing out and saying, hey, you know, we want to go away for the weekend. Where can I go, and what's safe? How do I do this? You know, where can I go? Where can I not go? And just helping them to feel comfortable. And really, that's been the biggest piece, you know, and with things like our water spa, which is a salinated mineral pool that actually is there for therapy purposes for your muscles in your scalp, your neck, your back, your legs. That lends itself well to the experience as well. So it all sort of fit together, and we've just been migrating with it over the last couple of years as need be. Obviously, COVID aside, you know, that was a big jolt for us this year, but the lesson for us has been that it's become less and less impactful as time has gone on, but still a significant portion of our overall share of guests.
So is there any negative experiences that you had to deal with through that progression?
There's never been negative experience in as much as having to take care of guests or anything like that. I mean, we assume the same liabilities as we do with both smoking and with alcohol where cannabis is concerned. We did in the first summer have a few of our strong repeat guests that voiced their concerns about, you know, us being pro-cannabis. But quite honestly, once we explained to them that really all that we were trying to do was to find a way for everybody to be feel welcome on the property, regardless of whether they were using cannabis or not, it became something where it became accepted. And quite honestly, a lot of those guests that had objections actually still came anyways. So it became less impactful in that regard as well. So really, it's nice to see, and I'm really interested to see where this goes in the future, because from what we've seen, this just feeds into exactly what the trends are.
Awesome, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's great. Lucas, tell us about your business and how you're operating now, because some people might be surprised that you're actually doing these high bars at weddings with families and at events. And so how are you able to do that? Where is the cannabis coming from? How do you keep it safe? How are you navigating this? And how could you work with venues and other festivals and events and in this space if this becomes?
Yeah, so basically, we're not distributing any cannabis. We don't sell, we don't do any of that. What we do is educate clients on and people on the type of cannabis they should be sharing with their friends and family at events. And obviously, as the years evolve, there's new products available, and we're very educated on these products that are being provided, and we implement those products, and we educate the client to purchase those products so we can infuse their products into the venue's products, and basically providing that service. Now, in regards of the safety, you know, we do events with people of all ages, so that's definitely something that people bring up is, what about children? What about guests underage? So that's the reason you want a company like us there, because anyone can have an event, anyone can share cannabis at an event. It's legally, you can bring 30 grams to a wedding and share with all the guests. What we do is we facilitate that none of the guests that get it are intoxicated. So if you're drunk, come to our bar, you're not getting a joint or a pre-infused beverage or anything like that. If you look underage, so anyone that looks under 25, we card. So we have the right to refuse allowing guests to consume cannabis at the event. So we take that very seriously, because I think at the end of the day, being the first to do it, we're trying to do it right so that, other companies that can kind of copy our idea or whatever, they do it right as well. We want to make sure that we don't add to the stigma, but we kind of break those barriers. So everything we've done, our bar is odorless. So, if you're a non-cannabis consumer, our bar will not offend you. So that was kind of one of those things where it was important to us that we cater to all the guests that are there, not just cannabis consumers. And then when it comes to just making sure everything is fully legal. So we make sure that the cannabis itself is purchased from a legal store. If it's not, there's no receipt. If it's opened, we will not serve it with you. We just won't do the event. So we have all these precautions in place. We have liability insurance for any venue for all the services that we provide, whether it's infusing food or beverages, to pre-rolling, vape stations with our products like the Bello to our Riser products. These are some amazing products that hit the market that can change the direction how people consume it. We just want to be able to offer all of that in a safe and elegant way, of course.
Awesome, thanks. How many events have you done so far since you started, approximately?
About 45 to 50 events. I can't tell you exactly. This year we were double that, but obviously nothing gonna happen. We had to postpone or cancel the events that we had scheduled. We're in the hospitality business and we've been crushed just like everybody else in the event world. But we believe it's gonna come back stronger. 2022 will be a great year. I believe in it. This year is just about networking and educating. We're actually working on a show where we can help educate people, because we get a lot of questions from the non-cannabis consumers, and that's the clientele that we deal with. We don't deal with cannabis consumers more so than we do with non-cannabis consumers.
Very good. Thank you so much, Lucas. Greg, talk to us. Tell us what you're thinking about. So you're obviously kind of curious, self-described, and you're considering this for your resort. So I love that you represent people who might not be sure. So tell us what's in your mind. What are you thinking about? What are your go forward thoughts?
Well, of course, and I'm sure John's mentioned this as well, and I'm sure many resort operators would be in the same boat. You're somewhat, you just want to be careful about integrating a cannabis experience with your existing guest base, because you're not always sure what the reaction is going to be. But I think we have a way to proceed through new experience development, and this is a perfect time to do it. We're going to be doing so many things differently by the time we emerge from the pandemic and all the things that go with it. It's a great time to look at new ways of doing things. So we've always taken an approach to experience development here where, we have this platform with, in a rural environment with all cottage accommodation by a lakeside. It's very relaxing. You've got lots of space to yourself. And Elmhurst isn't the only resort that has that. Many resorts have that. And then you layer a very local food offering on top of that, perhaps themed to go with the focus of the event. And then we add recreation programming or some kind of a TED Talk element where you have an expert comes in to introduce people to things that they're curious about. So that would be a great way for us to try cannabis related experiences here, and this is a great time to do it. And actually every time I'm exposed to more information about cannabis tourism, it becomes more interesting, because the themes that Brian touched on that went that had nuances of wellness and something that's like a not the right words, but like a taste of place, an Appalachian driven approach that is a natural fit with the sorts of events that we do, because our events are very much based on taking the best of our community and sharing them with a traveling public. So no, I think there's opportunities for us to be involved in events, and I think it's got potential, obviously, for new markets, both domestic and international, and you never know. We often cross-sell experiences at different times of year to our existing guest base. So I think it's it's a very interesting new opportunity. And I think there's lots of ways that we could successfully integrate it into what we do here at Elmhurst.
Thank you. That's great, Greg. I look forward to seeing how you move forward with this, because you're obviously, you and John are leading right now in terms of resorts in the province. And I want to go to Wendy now, because Wendy works with a lot of different properties. You know Greg and John, obviously, and Lucas, but you're working with properties in different countries who are actually successfully doing this already, and you're building a hub where tourists and properties can come together. So why is this important to us in Ontario, to Canada now? And how does the expansion of retail in this province kind of lend itself to this movement, Wendy? Tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start off with why this is important. Canada tourism and social consumption should be a key focal point with hospitality sector, as Canada has a very unique opportunity with federal legalization. This brings new revenue streams to the travel industry and the establishments. When we look at some of the properties and restaurants and that globally, they're very unique. There's the consumer that is the recreational consumer, then we have the wellness consumer, and they're looking for experiences. They're choosing destinations that they are visiting based on those offerings. A cannabis consumer that maybe is a medical cannabis consumer may only travel where they can have access to their medicine and where they can consume. What I see with the prepackaged beverages and edibles is a unique opportunity for these destinations to have product available to their clients. And I think this is very important, and this is where it will bring sort of what we currently have in place with some of the establishments starting to move forward. It'll bring the product now and the availability to some of those remote destinations. I mean, I've heard of clients that are actually having products shipped to a hotel, to the front desk, so that they have it when they land in Canada, and that they can pick it up at the front desk. They're driving 3 hours to get product from the destination so that they can consume once they're coming over from Europe. Canada has such a unique and robust regional destinations that this is just a must for the cannabis consumer. That's what they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for, where can I consume my product, but where can I purchase my product?
Wow, I can't believe the time went by so fast. Thank you, Wendy. And I want to thank all our panelists. I could honestly talk to you guys for longer. There's so much to talk about. And I think that's the point of today is, just to open the dialogue. As I said, like my role in New Heights is to try to bring people together to start these conversations and to work with the industry to make it a responsible and enjoyable environment. So at this point, I'm going to invite all of our guest speakers and Beth to come back to the session here. We have a chance for some questions. And I believe Beth has been collecting a few for us. So I will let Beth take us with some questions.
Okay, so I do have some questions, and I just want to get, here we go. So first of all, I just want to thank all of you. What a wealth of information today, just unbelievable. And I think you've given everyone lots and lots to either reaffirm their current position or giving them a lot to think about. So thank you so much to all of you. We've had a few questions come in through the chat over the course of the afternoon, and so I'm just going to start with right off the top. Could someone, and maybe Sean might be the best one, but could someone please explain exactly what the regulatory gap is? Are we to view it as a licensing system like a liquor license? Or if consumers already have access to retail cannabis consumables, where's the gap in the distribution network that will come through tourism?
Right. So it's a, Richard might want to chime in on this as well, but he's smiling at me. So it is a regulatory system. I can go to a cannabis store and purchase cannabis products and consume them in a park or in the privacy of my own home, but I can't consume them in a bar or a restaurant. I can go to the local liquor store, the LCBO, and I can purchase alcohol products, and I can bring them and purchase and consume them in my home. I can't consume them in a public park in Ontario, or I can go to a bar or restaurant and purchase alcoholic beverages there and consume them on site, or post-COVID or during COVID. Thankfully, the government of Ontario amended the regulations to allow restaurants, and it was a great move. I think it was about time to provide the opportunity for diners to take away drinks with their meals. So that is an evolution that we saw as an account of COVID. So it is a licensing and regulatory issue.
Great, thanks, Sean. Anybody wanted to contribute to that answer?
I think Richard was jumping in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have a job at SmartServe now, Sean. That was well done. I think you summed it up beautifully. You can't bring outside alcohol into a licensed facility because the assumption is the people there are trained, that it's legal alcohol, and it meets all the regulatory rules that exist. And the same would apply to cannabis. So thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, Brian, there has been a lot of interest in this idea of cannabis appellations. Can you maybe explain a little bit about how it works in California? Are there, is there a third-party auditing organization that oversees the integrity of the appellations? How does it, similar to like a marketing board, or how does it work?
So there's been some very active, well-organized groups that have really led the charge on this. The California Cannabis Tourism Association has been involved, but it's been spearheaded, I'd say, by a group called the Origins Council and the Mendocino Appalachians Project, which kind of emerged into the Origins Council. And then as far as the governing body, it's ran through the CDFA, which is the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And that will be the body that kind of orchestrates and administers the appellations. And that includes the appellations of origin, which is the terroir-based, microclimate-based, essence of place designations. But as important, and I'd like to really affirm this in cannabis, is the geographic indicators, the county of origin and the city of origin, because indoor cultivation is important to recognize and also provide platforms for storytelling, for cultural storytelling in tourism.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Okay, I'm going to throw the next question to John and Greg. So as venue operators, so with the stigma around cannabis starting to dwindle, what are your thoughts on consumable cannabis products within the meetings and convention space as it relates to cocktail receptions and social events?
Greg, do you want to go first? Do you want me to handle that?
Well, I have my own thoughts, but by all means, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I actually, I think by the time people get to that point as adults, if it's going to be offered, you're going to choose one over the other in most cases. It's not going to, I think they would integrate well. I've heard about some things with meetings and events where they're actually considering cannabis use during the meeting to open up different channels of communication and that sort of thing. I really think that as I think I can't remember the gentleman's name that was speaking at the beginning, that said in 10 or 20 years, this is really going to be looked back on as the, wow, what were we doing back then sort of moments. Because it really is just a developing, it's a developing market that's just at the very, very beginning stages. There's going to be a lot to be said and done about meetings and events where cannabis is concerned, that's for sure.
Greg, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I found it. I found the exploration and the information that Richard provided on, about the regulatory sort of framework that might be put in place to allow operators to present cannabis experiences on premise. I think that's really helpful to me as an operator. I think SmartServe, once it was established in the service of beverage alcohol, it gave everyone a standard that they could count on, and it was achievable, and it was consistent, and the service of beverage alcohol has been much easier since then, and so when you talk about regulating cannabis experiences, providing cannabis experiences the same way, it's a language that we understand very well, and I think it would be confidence inspiring both for operators and for consumers.
Okay, and I'm going to go to Wendy as well. Wendy, you may want to comment on that, but the other question that came up specifically to, branding yourself as a cannabis hotel, most people, as we saw in the research too, go down the road of smoking or vaping. How do you overcome that with, there are rules around, Smoke-Free Ontario. How do you overcome that when you're working with both, your clients and your customers?
Sure. I'll touch a quick point on the conferences, as you mentioned, Beth. One of the things to really think about is that a vast majority of conferences being held throughout Canada are cannabis conferences as we come out of COVID. So those conferences would definitely be looking for destinations where they have the ability to have consumption for evening events through beverages and prepackaged edibles. That's something that is currently not at some of the large venues that they go into to hold their events. But to the point of you speaking regarding, sorry, and if you could just, I went over there, and if you could just refresh me on that story, Beth.
How are you overcoming the notion that consuming cannabis doesn't have to be smoking or vaping, especially in a smoke-free Ontario?
Right. So, we have properties, and I'll speak first globally, they're cannabis-centric, where their entire property is about cannabis, through wellness, through teachings, workshops, so on and so forth. What we're seeing in Canada is the ability for outdoor destinations, so somewhere like Sir Sands or Elmhurst, where they have the locations outside that if somebody wants to consume through vaping or combustibles, they can, because they can do it in a safe way outdoors. But it really opens up to the opportunity with the beverages as well as edibles to have that consumption happening indoors, especially with the Canadian climate. The clients don't necessarily want to always go outside, and it's giving that safe environment that it's the days of people sneaking off into an alleyway outside of a hotel, which is unsafe, are gone. And the consumer is going to be specifically wanting these properties that are welcoming to them.
Great, thank you. So now I'm going to go just to the, when we talk about food and beverage in Ontario, we have to talk about labeling. And that comes right down to menus, and there's certain information that has to be provided. So both to Lucas and to Sean, how, what does labeling look like, and packaging information in order to educate the consumer on, the optimum dose of what's in the product, and what's and how it might be combining with other ingredients in the product.
Go ahead, Lucas.
Okay. I will start off by, from my experience, when we're kind of looking at what would be the best cultivar or product available that would work best for the client's event. One thing that's definitely missing, obviously, on the labels is everything from terpenes. This is something that's hard to find on the packaging. That has an effect on the experience of the consumer. So obviously now we have, we look at the labeling. I think the labeling needs to be updated in some sense for the full experience. And that reaches as well to medicinal, not just the recreational, but I think that's lacking. But I think that, yeah, we got to improve on that. In regard to the food, everything from sugar, I think that's like, beverages are amazing. It's definitely a safer consumption than smoking, but if it's filled with too much sugar, then we're just pushing products that are not necessarily healthy either. So I definitely want to add to the health benefit, but let's not let's not add all these ingredients that don't need to be in there necessarily.
And in terms of the prepackaged beverages and foods, the labeling requirements on our sector through Health Canada are significant, and it's something that we as a sector, comply with across the board, all licensed producers. Any product that we produce needs to be licensed and approved for sale in Canada by Health Canada. The labeling provisions in the cannabis regulations are extensive. They're very thorough. I actually don't know if you can see it on the camera here. This is a Cannabis-Beverage, one of our houseplant beverages. You can see the kind of labeling that is required by law with health recommendations on it. The components that are THC, CBD, of course, the THC logo, and then the full kind of nutritional bar that you would find on other health products, as well as the different barcoding systems that basically allow us to trace this product back right from seed. So if there's any health considerations. So the labeling regulations under which we and all licensed producers operate are very stringent and controlled, and we clearly couldn't put our products on the market if we didn't comply fully with those.
Great.
And if I can just add to that too, I think the intention here is that if this is legalized for the on-premise channel, that the purchasing of the products would go through the Ontario Cannabis Store in the same way that a licensee orders alcohol through the LCBO. Is that correct, Sean? Am I getting that right?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah, we've talked to OCS about this, and they see this as potentially being more points of sale. As you may have read in the media, OCS is working right now closely with the AGCO on expanding the number of retail stores in the province. Right now, we're at about just a little shy of 200, and they're planned to grow that significantly over the next year.
Great. Okay, and I've got to ask Dave a question here. Dave, can you talk a little bit more about either information and or recommendations regarding, marketing, advertising restrictions, what do you think, what would you like to see from a cannabis brand connection to events and festivals?
Well, I think just some sort of on-site recognition or availability. Like right now, the way I understand the legislation is unmarked tents, not a lot of branding available on print material and stuff like that. So just, I guess the ability to monetize the implementation of cannabis into the festival event world, with the liabilities and the risk management, there's certainly going to be a cost to bringing this all in, and I think it's an opportunity to share some of that cost and make it a little bit easier for those that want to get in the game to get in the game.
Great.
But again, I that's a federal thing too, right? So hopefully it's something the provinces can work on with the feds.
Well, let's hope so. Okay, we're running out of time, but I do have one last question, and I'm gonna throw it out to anybody who wants to answer. I think Brian might have some input, Lucas and Sean for sure. But since THC and CBD have different effects on different people, how is flow state to be achieved for a group of people having a multi-course dinner? I know we need to do a lot more research in this area. So.
I'll let Brian and Lucas take that one. I would just say that in Canada, it's interesting that in Canada, CBD and THC are both classified as cannabinoids because they both are, whereas other jurisdictions have a different treatment for CBD, which is seen as being more of a health additive or a wellness additive. In Canada, they're regulated the same way. Which is interesting, and which is something I think is going to be looked at in the future potentially. But for now, they're both looked at the same way. So I don't really see CBD fitting into this, into the flow state that Brian described. But maybe he can walk us through that.
I agree with you. So I think I heard a statement recently that I think was pretty clever, and that's that CBD, when you take the right amount of dose of CBD, it really is about what you don't feel. It's about taking away the anxiety, the stress, and kind of putting you in a peaceful state that's not as psychotropic or psychoactive, right? Now, when you get into the THC, especially in the tourism funnel, because part of the issues we've seen in California with the lack of coordination is people coming to visit and taking too much, right? And they spend 2 days in their hotel room trying to shake it off. It becomes a bad imprint on their trip simply because we haven't coordinated yet, and it's still a young experience that we're innovating. But when you take the right microdose of THC, the THC molecule, it's about microdosing and having it done in a guided way where you can help people steer toward achieving flow state with making sure that you don't overshoot it. And this comes, again, with communication and education. So if you have a group of people, as you kind of suggested, if you're having a medicated dinner that includes THC, my first suggestion is to remain in microdosing world, and that is typically 5 milligrams or less is what I would recommend. Now, people that are more experienced, they understand the biphasic effects of cannabis. Cannabis kind of works in these intervals, and they know how to kind of self-titrate, and they understand what their dose is. And so we're talking about more novice consumers and the worry around that person that doesn't have as much experience with that THC and consuming THC. So for a group setting in this kind of environment, it would be microdosing to achieve flow state. It would be probably 5 milligrams or less. Maybe it toggles up to 7. And it would be doing it in a controlled, orchestrated way where you're going to really lean into undershooting, obviously. And you're going to make sure that people walk away having an amazing experience. I really believe that tourism has a responsibility here. And I talk about this in California. We're in our 4th year. A lot of people, when they travel, they're out of their comfort zones. They're ready to try something new. They want to try cannabis, and they're going to be open to trying it. It kind of goes hand in hand. So being prepared to field these visitors and do it in a smart way is a responsibility. And if it's okay, I'd like to touch on one more thing. And that is just to remember that, you know, even hemp and there is the CBD and health and wellness component, but I have worked with hotels as well to integrate kind of hemp products on their property. And this becomes an attraction that speaks to sustainability and this traveler demographic that appreciates low footprint, which is becoming more and more a part of the values and importance, I think globally across industry, especially in tourism. So I believe it's especially in California, places where it is legal, it's definitely time to have a healthy conversation and at least risk mitigation and be able to serve visitors in a hospitality driven way. And that means partnerships and normalization. And of course, there's the incremental revenue, which there's a lot of it. And that could be a hemp postcard. It could be cannabis themed art. It could be things in lobby shops. There's amazing opportunities for hotels from hemp bath towels and bed sheets all the way up to cannabis delivery as a service amenity. So I would think holistically about it and just be sure that you kind of toggle back to that because the opportunities are outstanding and it really, each kind of stakeholder in a destination, whether it's a hotel or attraction, should be able to integrate whether it's risk mitigation training and education for their staff or whether it's having a special event at the SF MoMA or a museum that has CBD drinkables, or whether it's something beyond that with THC products that are kind of offered throughout the destination. So I kind of went off topic, but I just wanted to share that last comment.
Okay,
I want to jump on.
I'm going to give Lucas, I'm going to give you the last word there, Lucas.
I was just going to say, I agree with Brian. You know, the way we've structured our infusing, we do actually 1 milligram dosages, 1-to-1 THC CBD is our preference. And the reason is we believe that no one's coming to an event, wedding, birthday party and just consuming one drink. The drink is a social aspect, so they're gonna have drinks all night. So if they take 7 drinks, like you said, they're still at that max in that safe zone. So we believe in that train effect. We don't want people to we probably would suggest people just consume 1 milligram for the first event experience because every human being is different. Our metabolisms are different. So someone can consume 50 milligrams and not feel anything at all. Then you have somebody who eats 1 milligram and trips out, you know? So it's one of those things where you've got to go low and slow. You've got to learn your dosage, basically. And I think in time, people are going to learn that. And we're actually looking into collaborating with a company out there. So if anybody's out there that does on-site cannabis metabolism tests or something that we could use to kind of educate guests on site, we would love to implement that, because I think people need to know their tolerance so that they feel safe consuming more throughout the night. Otherwise, low and slow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I can't thank all of you enough for being here, for staying. I know we've gone a little bit past our time, but I really do appreciate, I know Jen does too. Thank you all so much for sharing your insight and your wisdom. We've got so much that we can learn from all of you. Even more, we could continue this conversation, I think, for a long time, but we need to, we are going to wrap it up. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Beth. And thank you to everyone who attended, for all the panelists and keynote speakers, and especially to you, Sean, and your team for bringing this forward, starting the dialogue, and really representing the industry, both on the cannabis side and the tourism side. I think it's really exciting times. And now more than ever, I think everyone is open to innovation, new ways of doing business, and we need to partner and work together to find some great solutions. So, you know, as a follow-up, we have our Cannabis Tourism Summit that's in partnership with Tayo as the pre-conference day to their annual summit in Ottawa at the Brook Street Hotel next year. That's coming up, but in the meantime, we'd love it to hear from you, and we may have some additional events coming up in the near future on this topic.
Great. So watch your emails tomorrow for a follow-up email, and we look forward to hearing from you all soon. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.